Thank you all for being here. It means a lot, not just to see so many folks, but it's actually very motivating and inspiring because so many folks care about this place, about the work we're trying to do. So thank you all for being here. Real quick, special thanks to my wife, Alana, who's here, who, if she didn't hold down the fort for me while I was gone for 3 weeks on a ship, watching our 4-year-old, hey, Finn, this trip wouldn't have been possible or doable for me. And thanks also for my in-laws, Karen and Alan Hong, who are here, who are always just there for us. So thank you for that. And then special thanks to you, Randy, for taking the time. And not just your time, but your candor and accessibility, helping to facilitate this trip, for being here tonight on a Friday. I imagine there might be other things that you could do that would be fun, but thank you for that a lot. If you have any opening comments or remarks you want to make, we can start there.
No, nothing really. But I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here at happy hour on a Friday. I thought we might have 25 people, and I'm just like, wow. But thank you for your support of this. And Nathan, thank you for coming. This is not you and Alana together have covered our monument for quite a while. You've always done a terrific job. But this one is just over the top, the images. So I cannot thank you and Civil Beat enough for covering this story and doing it so masterfully. So
thanks, Randy. I appreciate the remarks. I thought a good place to sort of set the scene or ground ourselves would just be to show that video that Kavika, our super talented videographer back there, put together. It's behind the scenes-ish, so we can take a look at that. It's just 3 or 4 minutes. This last trip was everything. It was humbling, it was exhilarating and exhausting, and at times very depressing. My name is Nathan Eagle. I'm the deputy editor at Civil Beat. Going back to the first trip in 2017, it was life-changing, I think is the word I use to explain it. And I wasn't ready to come back, and I also didn't think I'd ever get to go back. Fortunately, earlier this year, I got an email from the chief scientist for NOAA saying, do you want to go back? And I've said, absolutely. I will move mountains to make this experience happen again. This place it's just like no other place I've ever been to. It's really personal, the way it affects you individually, and it's across the board. You know, people talk about dreaming different when they're out there and dreaming about that place when they get back. Experiencing what life can be like if left untouched, the pristineness, that's the word that they use a lot to describe Papahānaumokuākea as pristine. You go up there, and one of the things that affects you a lot is it's not pristine in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, from heaps of marine debris and trash on the beaches to these invasive algae taking over things. But there are moments, for sure, tons of moments, where you're in the water or on land with species found nowhere else in the world, and you realize that this is really incredible. When you get on board this research ship, you don't know who you're going to meet. You know that there's going to be 20 or 30 scientists on board, but you don't know anything about them really. But you're immediately struck by how incredible these people are. You know, they've found a passion, for one, and I think that cuts across the board. Anyone who's found a passion in life, a calling, they're very interesting people, and you just want to talk to them about that. But the other thing that's really striking about them is just their commitment to it, to living it. And that's physical, because they are getting up early. They're on boats all day in the sun and waves and surf and just taking a beating physically, frankly. It's mental as well. You know, they're coming back and then having to process this data, rally it like in the late hours to log this data and then make sense of it. And it's emotional too, because they're affected. They got into this because they were curious about the natural world and wanted to understand it more. And some of the things you find out, a lot of the things you find out, can be very disheartening, can be very depressing, so they have to have this mental fortitude that can be contagious at times, in the best way. It can be inspiring to approach your own life in this committed way. As a journalist, one of the things that I hope that our work can do is affect change in a positive way. I mean, it's as simple as that. We want to bring back and then share stories that engage the community. We want them to care about this place that many folks may never experience and understand why it matters to them, even though it's way out there. Why does it matter back home? And we're hoping we can do that through stories and through storytelling that affects them in a way that they want to maybe take action.
Well, let's back way out first before we dive into this trip and just kind of orient where we are when we talk about Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. I've talked to many folks born and raised who think of Northwesterns as Kauai and Nihoa, but it goes way, way farther. So Papahānaumokuākea is, of course, about nearly 600,000 square miles, somewhere in that ballpark. We went all the way to the end to Holaniku, which is about 1,300 miles maybe over the course of 3 weeks, and then back home. So that's that. Also then, still at this like broader level, I wanted to talk a little about the history of protections for this place that go back generations and the apolitical nature of them. I figured I'll start by just kind of saying what's happening now and then hand it off to you and go back. So a few days before President Biden left office, NOAA officially declared Papahānaumokuākea a national marine sanctuary. That has a 45-day waiting period, so it's not set yet. And part of that timing, as Senator Schatz explained to me, was that last time he was in office, there was concern that Papahānaumokuākea was on his list of monuments that could be downsized or eliminated altogether. So they looked at the sanctuary as a way to provide an extra layer of protection. It does a lot of other things that we'll talk about, but that was part of the timing. So that's kind of where things are at now. If things go as NOAA is expecting in 45 days or so, it'll be a sanctuary as well. It's an additional layer. But can you tell us a little bit more about what is a sanctuary designation? Why does it matter? What are you hearing?
Yeah, it does get very confusing. We are many things, multiple personalities. We have a state marine refuge. We have a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, basically a seabird refuge. We have our old reserve, which became the monument. All of these are still in existence. The reserve was promoted to monument. Monuments, though, can be transient because they're formed with the stroke of a president's pen. Being designated under the National Marine Sanctuaries Act has some really big advantages, not the least of which are access to emergency response funds and the ability to promulgate a penalty schedule. Right now, we have regulations, but we don't have a penalty schedule. You're not allowed to go there without a permit, but there's not a whole lot we could do, honestly, if you did. A penalty schedule would give us the ability to have civil fines, to seize assets like boats. And so it really is a big step forward into making this a really secure sanctuary.
Sure. And could you comment a little bit about it's gone from Roosevelt to George W., Obama, Clinton, in between. It's kind of swayed back and forth.
If you want to talk about protection for Papahānaumokuākea, the original protector was actually Mother Nature herself. It's just geography and rough seas. It's a long way to go, and you get beat up going there and beat up worse coming back. So that, more than any single thing, I think, has kept this place, as you said, relatively pristine. As Nathan said, it's not on most people's radar. Most people don't even know the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands exist, and that also contributes to its protection, even in the absence of any kind of legislation. So it's really distance and the difficulty of going there kept it relatively below radar, out of sight, and pristine. And below radar, I mean that people just were not aware that this place existed, and so they didn't even think to try and go there. So that, more than anything else, has kept it pristine. Now, around the turn of the century, first of all, the native Hawaiians were the original colonizers, occupants of this area. So there's evidence of hundreds of years of permanent habitation. And they were also the first protectors, because very small islands like Nihoa, it's about the height and size of Diamond Head. There's a Nihoa palm tree that is endemic to Nihoa. It's highly endangered. It's not found anywhere else on Earth. And yet the ancient Hawaiians were able to live there in a place that's really lacking in building lumber and firewood, but they didn't kill all the trees. They lived in harmony with nature. So even though there was a human footprint, a human presence, it was very much oriented towards not leaving a huge footprint. But around the turn of the century, after Western explorers and other foreigners found this place, This was when large women's hats with bird feathers and fruits and nothing you'd wear today. But that was very fashionable. And so there was a huge market need for feathers to decorate women's hats. So largely on account of that, the first U.S. president to put protections in place was Teddy Roosevelt. And he created the Hawaiian Islands National Wildlife Refuge. The primary purpose at that time was to protect birds. But this is before lawyers and GIS got involved. The executive order it's not an executive order, it was not a proclamation. I'm having a brain fart. Anyway, the original creation document just shows the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands as kind of a big oval map around it. It says Northwestern Hawaiian Islands and surrounding waters. So that was really the first move to protect not just the islands themselves, which are attractable and approachable to us, but also the underwater world, which is a little less approachable, a little less easy to see that there is a need for conservation. So Roosevelt went first. World War II came along, and the military hasn't had a major footprint there. But after World War II, things kind of went back to it being remote and forgotten. But in 1960s, Lyndon Johnson put a few more protections in. As most recently, as you know, Bill Clinton created the reserve, Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Coral Reef Ecosystem Reserve, which became the monument, made into a monument by George Bush, enlarged by Barack Obama, and now we're up for another layer of protection. So the take-home of that story is that conservation biology is and really should be a non-political, non-partisan issue. It started with a Republican and a Democrat, another Democrat, a Republican, a Democrat. So it really should be a nonpartisan issue, and it has been. So we have our fingers crossed that will continue to be the case. And in about 40 odd days, we'll have a National Marine Sanctuary.
Thanks for that. Let's dive into the trip. So one of the places I was most excited to get to was East Island, initially anyway. Not that I wasn't excited to go see invasive seaweeds, but I was really excited about East Island, which is there. Because I'd written about it in 2018, Hurricane Walaka literally wiped it off the map. So I'll do a real quick detour because I wanted to share where Randy and I stayed. We had a stowaway, but he did not make the trip. That's my son, Finn. I took top bunk, which was spacious. But we made it through our 3 weeks. The perk of that was that I could bug Randy with questions anytime, day or night. And as a journalist, I have plenty. So it worked out well. That's my
the downside for Nation is I work at odd hours. I get up early and I work, and I stay up late and I work. And he was very, very, he said nothing. He was very, very ideal roommate.
Absolutely. So we took off on the Oscar Elton SETI. That's the name of NOAA's research vessel. It's a couple hundred feet long with a few smaller boats on it. That was my workstation. And we set off to the northwest. So like I was saying, one of my places I was most excited to get to was East Island. And part of that was that I'd written about it when Walaka wiped it off the map. It has since made a recovery. It's about 60% there. But I was wondering, can you take us to that day? Like, what was it like when we set out to go check on East Island? Why does the island even matter?
Yeah, well, let's give a little background on East Island. East Island, it's basically a glorified sandbar on the atoll French Frigate Shoals, or the Hawaiian name is Lalo. So it's just a sand island. It's not much more than that. But it's of significance because all of the honu, all of the turtles that we see here in the main Hawaiian Islands, when I was a kid, we hardly ever saw turtles. And now, tourists are stepping all over them at Laniakea and elsewhere. In spite of the amazing numerical comeback, there still is a life history bottleneck where 90% of the turtles we see here go back to Lalo to nest. And so it's really critical that they have these really unassuming beaches. They're not much at all. They're glorified sandbars. They need these beaches to call out and nest, have their eggs. Monk seals also are completely marine animals, except they need to come ashore for reproduction to have their pups. So these tiny little sandbar islands are critical for the recovery of these endangered species. And they're also extremely vulnerable to the triple threat of climate change, which is rising temperatures, which cause coral bleaching. Remember, corals make sand makes sandbars. Seawater acidification, which also makes it hard for corals to survive and make sand for sandbars. And then increased frequency and severity of major storms. Basically, I'm talking category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes, which we never used to have in this neck of the woods until just a couple of years ago. We've been having more frequent storms and bigger storms. And unfortunately, in 2018, One of these big storms, it was a Category 5 at one point, went right over Lalo and right over this atoll. Overnight, the kind of shoreline erosion and beach loss that we had predicted for the next 100 years of a meter or two of sea level rise, it happened overnight. What we were predicting for the end of this century happened 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. So climate change is not only real, it's coming up fast behind us. And so the interest in the East Island is that it just wiped out nesting habitat for a majority of the green sea turtles in the state of Hawaii. And I was mortified when we saw it. I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. The first person I called was George Balaz, he's now retired, but he worked on sea turtle research and recovery for NOAA for 40 years. He's probably arguably the world expert in Hawaiian green sea turtles. And I called him. I'm like, George, East Island is gone. He's like, oh, that's all right. I was like, wait, what? What do you mean that's all right? He's like, Randy, sea turtles and sandbars and hurricanes have coexisted for 50 million years. If hurricanes were going to prevent sea turtles from surviving, it would have happened a long time ago. It'll mean they'll lose a breeding season or two, but they will find somewhere else to go. And thank God George was right. So a few years later on our trip, we have been tracking this over the last few years. And so East Island has slowly been reaccreting. All of that sand is slowly piling up again. Now, although it looks like a sandbar, it's not quite as solid as it used to be. It used to be a vegetated island. As you know, roots and soil and to help to hold that island in place. Sand, if you just leave it in place and wash it with salt water, it tends to kind of dissolve together and form that beach rock. Like if you go out to the North Shore, there's that stuff that'll just make hamburger out of you if you fall down, that white corally looking stuff. That's kind of cemented beach rock. And that helps these islands when that sand kind of solidifies to resist wave erosion. But Hurricane Walaka washed completely over that island, completely over Turn Island, the other island. And so we've been tracking it using satellite data because this is not someplace you can just get in a car or get in a small boat and go to. So sometimes it's a couple of years between trips, especially with COVID in between Hurricane Walaka and the present. We lost out on several years of research. Using satellites showed us that the island is reaccreting, but you can't see turtles and seals from satellites. And Nathan, with his amazing drone photography, this was probably my 25th trip up there, but I've always seen it from sea level. I've never seen images from drones. And the images, the video he got of East Island are just that's East Island. It's just mind-blowingly beautiful. And what George Balaz noticed in these is you can see the shadows of nesting pits for the turtles. And Nathan, you did the counting. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I sent that email to you or that photo to you and to George. And George got so excited because to me, I'm just like, oh, it's just sand. Like, I don't know, maybe the wind did that. And he's like, no, there's turtles. And he's counting them. And he's like, I need to do a scientific paper like tomorrow. I need to do this. And I'm like, please don't scoop me on this story. I would love to actually write about this first. He got super, super excited and did this, like back of the napkin kind of accounting to kind of guess or gauge like how many sea turtles had already been returning this past season to breed there, which was super, super inspiring, encouraging, all those things. And an island that had not existed like several years ago after the hurricane. So that was cool. I can share a quick behind the scenes email exchange too, where Randy's more into algae, fish. I think that's fair to say. George, very into turtles. And so we're sharing photos, trying to count turtles, look at it. And I noticed you circled one area. You're like, what did you notice in the photo?
Oh. Well, somewhere in the water, right on the beach, there was a giant school of fish. I couldn't quite tell if it was moi or mullet, but it's the kind of schooling that you don't see here anymore. There's not enough moi or mullet left to form a school that big. And that was just mind-blowing. I'm a fish biologist, by the way. I kind of stumbled backwards in some algae work. But I don't know much about turtles, as George found out. Thank God we have people like George. He was absolutely right. The turtles didn't seem too concerned. They came back. The island's coming back. And we were there a little late in the season after the peak of nesting. So we didn't see nesting turtles or hatching turtles, but we could see the nest pits where nests were excavated. And so that's what George was counting. And you look at some of Nathan's aerial pictures, the top of the island is just covered with 100% cover of pockmarks of turtle nests. Yeah. And that is great news in the middle of a very discouraging situation. This whole story came about because climate change and sea level rise and big storms, global warming, are overwhelming these nesting beaches. And it was, some of my most emotionally terrible and greatest moments have happened in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And one of the worst days was seeing what Hurricane Walaka did to this place. One of the best days was seeing that East Island is back and the turtles are using it. So even within a kind of grim situation, there's signs of hope. And I'm basically an optimist, or I would have quit my job years ago.
Very true. Yeah, and I think this year will be the first year since the storm that biologists will be on island and do their official counts instead of kind of doing day trips over from Turn Island. So we'll be tracking East Island's progress. You mentioned the vegetation too. That's another thing folks will be looking at. Notably absent still were the birds, the seabirds. I had seen photos that my wife Alana had taken in 2018 right before the storm, and it's just completely covered in birds everywhere. So we'll be looking. Let's go on down the island chain a little bit, shall we? I think one of the primary focuses of the trip, and I think some of the upcoming trips, I think is in mind, is the chondria. And so we went all the way to the end of the chain with stops on the way, of course, for fish counts and checking coral health, a number of dives. And then we kind of circled the bend at Haloniku and came back and stopped at Manawai, Pearl and Hermes Atoll. And we were looking for this invasive algae. Can you kind of share what it is? Why does it matter?
Oh, let's start with the definition of an invasive. We have native species, but they are sometimes disrupted by invasives, and they're defined as it actually could be a native species, but generally they're not. But an invasive is a species that kind of goes berserk. It explodes and it displaces native species. So it kind of smothers native species. So this alga, we discovered it in 2019 when it had already gone invasive. We realized going back through old pictures that it had been there since 2015. It was just in such low abundances that we just didn't recognize it. And algae are really hard to identify when they're very small. And all of a sudden in 2019, for some reason, it just exploded. And we got to Manawai, Pearl and Hermes Atoll, and there were mats upon mats upon mats. I mean, these mats would grow about 10 to 12 inches thick and could cover 100 square meters each, like gigantic mats. So there were areas of the reef that were 100% smothered. All the coral, everything under it was dead and just covered with these mats of algae. And oh my God, that was absolutely horrific to see. I mean, we basically got quarantined. When we found that, of course, I radioed that home, and they basically told us, stay there, don't move. Because divers are known that we can be vectors for coral disease, for things that hitchhike on your wetsuits or get into your gear. If it stays damp, you can stay alive and maybe hitch a ride to the next island. So what we had been doing already just to keep down the possibility of transmission of coral disease in that way is no one likes it, but every time we move between islands, all of our dive gear goes into bleach. It's very hard on your dive gear, but bleach is absolute. That makes sure that nothing will move on your gear from island to island. Now, when we're at an atoll where it's everywhere, it's in the water, your ship might be contaminated. That's why they told us, please don't go to Midway. You're a dirty ship now, stay at your dirty atoll. So we did. And we actually got, because we're working at Manawai, we actually got several new species of good algae, not invasive algae, beautiful algae. But we also got to do a lot of baseline work because we spent over 2 weeks there just outlining the area covered by this outbreak, and it was phenomenal. And the biggest fear is if something like that got back to Oahu, oh my God, out there it's an ecological disaster, bad enough. You bring it here and put something like this on our coral reefs, which are one of the economic engines that support tourism in this state. If that stuff ever got here, it'd be an economic nightmare and disaster. So we continue to feel under the gun, under a lot of pressure to figure out where this came from, what made it go berserk, what might be able to make it go away. And so we're looking at nutrient profiles to see whether there might have been an influx of fertilizer, maybe really upwelling of deep nutrient-rich ocean water that came up. Or there could be other mechanisms that resulted in this outbreak. But one thing we found is it forms these big mats that smothers everything under it. So it's created its own pool of nutrients. It's like it's created its own nutrient soup, and it's just living on the decomposing nutrients, nitrogen of all the animals under it that died in this kind of trapped water space. So that might be one thing that enables it to explode. But there's so much that we don't know. We have graduate students working, trying to model where it might have come from, because we found it here. We described it as a new species because it doesn't correspond to anything that's known to science. But that's really weird. Invasive species are almost never new species. It's something that you know that came from there and it doesn't belong here and it came here and it went crazy. That's typically the story for invasive. So this one, there's a lot of, it's the mystery algae. We don't know where it came from. There is a chance it could be a native. A Hawaiian species had just been overlooked and for some reason went berserk. That seems a little unlikely though, because none of our native fishes feed on it. We really haven't seen evidence of herbivory or predation. So that circumstantially suggests that this might be an alien as well as an invasive.
Sure, sure. And that's actually a good transition too to what it does taste like. We've seen even uhu spit it out, but back in the lab, like that day, collected samples. And so why did you ask me to eat some of it?
We're getting into unpermitted activities here, but one of my old mentors, one of my mentors in grad school was Dr. Isabella Abbott, who's a native Hawaiian from Maui. She passed away about 10 years ago when she went to the very top of her field, algae, internationally. I mean, she's just the demigod of limu. And she always told me, when I bring her specimen, she's like, well, Randy, you're Hawaiian. Did you taste it? Did you eat it? What does it taste like? So largely because of Izzy, I have now eaten probably 15 or 20 new species just to see what they taste like. And it's not for nothing, and it's not actually for nutrition, but a lot of these have gotten the Hawaiian names, Olelo Hawaii. The scientific name, the formal scientific epithet is in Hawaiian. And so we go to our Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group, and they go through a Hawaiian thought process. They want to know everything about this new species. What does it look like? Where does it live? How does it reproduce? What does it taste like? So I am actually just collecting data on behalf of our Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group. That said, though, this chondria, it's an ecological nightmare, but it's really not too bad to eat. It doesn't have, the flavor is not quite as good as our ogo that we put in poke, but its branches are thick enough. It's kind of like that gorilla ogo. It puts a really good crunch, hypothetically, in your poke. No, we did not have poke, but if you were to use it in poke, I think it'd be great.
Yeah, I think so too. Bad for coral, good for poke bowls. We could eat our way out of this mess, because that's the light side. The downside is that there really isn't anything to do about this, is there?
Well, for marine invasive species, because of the way marine animals can disperse with larvae that can drift long distances or spores, once it's introduced somewhere, it's virtually impossible to wipe it out. The best you might be able to hope for in the marine environment is control. So many of you may have heard of the so-called super suckers that work in Kaneohe Bay. It's like an underwater vacuum cleaner, and they suck up alien invasive algae. They'll probably never eradicate it, but they control it. And in the marine environment, that's considered a big success. Now, our challenge here is Manawa is about 1,200 miles from Honolulu. There are no harbors, no gas stations, no boats. So to mount an effort like that would be logistically complex and insanely expensive.
Absolutely. Thanks. Let's go. Continue making our way back back home down the chain. I want to talk about one of our last stops. We didn't stop getting in the water, but we stopped by Nihoa. And to set the kind of stage for that, I had at that point spent a couple of weeks bunking with you. May have felt longer, no. And this morning was the most excited I'd ever seen you the whole trip. And we saw some really great, exciting things. We were surrounded by sharks one day, ulua the next day, seeing endemic species the next. It's some really great things, but no day were you more excited from my observation than that day. That morning, and it's morning, I think you call it morning, I call it night. The stars were still out, but we were close to the sun coming up. I heard you leave the room and start knocking on some of the other scientists' doors and going, wake up. This is effing epic. And he didn't say effing though, but it was I was like, well, this is so cool. So can you take us to that morning? Why was it so special?
Absolutely.
What's it meant?
Yeah, Nihoa is the first of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, about a day's sail just past Kauai, so it's the closest. It's also one of the few northwestern Hawaiian Islands that are actually a high volcanic island, or what's left of one. It's like, if you can imagine the big island subsiding for another 10 million years, and imagine the top of Mauna Kea just sticking up above the water, something maybe the size of Diamond Head. That's Nihoa. But it has, like I mentioned, hundreds of years of permanent habitation by my ancestors. Religious sites, fishing gear, agricultural terraces, house sites. So the Hawaiians were there for a long time, and it's a very, very significant place in the Hawaiian cosmology. I mean, if you think about the names of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, Nihoa is really the only one that was in common use when I started this job 20 odd years ago. And archival research now has resurrected Hawaiian names for many of the other islands. The Hawaiian Lexicon Committee has also given modern Hawaiian names to these islands, but this is one of the few old names that was not lost at that time. So the cultural significance of this place is significant. And I've been doing this for 20 plus years. My first trip up there actually was in 1982. And we always blow past Nihoa. We're never there at the right time. But on this trip, it looked like on our way home, we'd be approaching Nihoa a little before sunrise. And I wanted to get our cultural people, get everyone out of bed to do Ealae, which is a sunrise chant. You chant the sun up. And to be at Nihoa for a Hawaiian and a scientist and someone who loves this place with all of my heart, to be able to do Ealae at sunrise at Nihoa was just an over-the-top chicken skin experience. I'm still getting chicken skin just thinking about it. But yeah, that was the view. It was just incredible. Yeah, and as Nathan said, I woke everyone up to go see this, like it or not. And we did Ealae on the bow of the ship at dawn at Nihoa.
It was definitely worth waking up for. Absolutely. I wanted to encourage, before we switch into some Q&A, I want to make sure we leave enough time to just do some Q&A. If you do have questions, send your note cards to Ashley or others, and they'll get to me via my handy Slack channel here. But let's see. Let me pull those up. I do think actually this would be a good time now. Just checking the time. Are you okay taking some questions from the audience?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I've got several already. One of the ones that I will start with, because it's one of the questions I got personally when I got off the boat the most, was, did you have any close calls with sharks while you were in the water? I can share personally. For me, I didn't have close calls with sharks. It takes a little getting used to. My former boss still calls me to this day a shark apologist. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. I was stoked last weekend because my son Finn got to have his first experience snorkeling with a white tip shark. But so maybe I'm an anomaly there. But we were surrounded, a couple dozen sharks at different spots. But so maybe not just this trip, but in general, in your experience in the monument.
Well, define what you mean by a close encounter. Because if you talk to my team, Nathan and a couple of other writers, actually, I've kind of been paraphrasing, but they've said things like Randy's team, they're the kind of people that when someone yells shark, everyone jumps into the water to see the shark. So in our world, a close encounter is actually a good thing because I don't know how many of you dive, but if you dive around here, you just don't see very many sharks. A couple a year maybe, or for Finn, it's once in a lifetime thing. Up there, it's not uncommon sometimes to be diving with 80 or 100 sharks. And for the most part, most of the time, they're very well fed. We're not spearfishing. There's no blood in the water. And so they're just curious. And they come in close and they look. And in that context, a close encounter is a wonderful thing. It's an aside, but we do these really deep dives to 300 feet. And you can't come straight up and get in the boat. You have to so-called decompress, like just hang out for 2 or 3 hours sometimes. And it's really a bummer when the sharks don't show up because you're just hanging there in blue water, freezing and just like waiting to go home and take a hot shower. But when the sharks show up, I could sit there for hours, days, just watching the sharks circle us. And they'll come in closer and they'll go away. And yeah, so a close encounter generally is a good thing. We have had moments when the sharks get a little twitchy. And you can tell right off that that's not a happy shark. You don't have to be a fish behavior guy. You just know that shark's kind of irritated. Yeah, so there have been moments when we've just decided, hey, let's get out of here. It's time to go before they get, too aggressive. And we do see big tiger sharks. We have been approached by them a couple of times. That's a different ballgame. Now, when I'm talking about good close encounters, I'm talking about 3 to 5 foot Galapagos sharks, 12-foot tiger sharks. That's a whole nother ballgame. And we do see those once in a while. But generally, this is a very rich ecosystem. The sharks are well fed. They're not looking at us as food for the most part. They just think for the most part, they haven't seen people, maybe ever. So we're probably just the weirdest thing they've seen all day. And they just want to hang out and check us out. And we look at them and they look at us, and that's a good day.
Yeah, I agree. I think during our pool dive checkout, one of the many boxes I had to check before being even allowed on the boat. What was drilled into me is like, don't worry about the sharks. Worry about the olua. Those guys can get mean. And we felt them like they'd hit the props of the boat sometimes, or they'd circle you, and they switch to like a black color, and they're in like hunting mode. Can you comment on the oluas being actually scarier than the sharks possibly?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've never had anybody bit by a shark. We've had quite a few divers bitten by olua. For those of you that fish, that's a really prized game fish. Every shore fisher's dream is the 100-pound club, a 100-pound olua. And we see those dozens every day. We've seen them up to 150 pounds. It's nuts. I mean, it's nothing like here. Here they're hunted almost to extirpation, where generally when you see an olua, he's going the other way, at the limit of visibility. Up there, they mob you, they circle you, and once in a while they build up a head of steam and they'll bite you. So I tell people, don't wear jewelry, don't wear earrings, don't swim around with your hands like this. Keep them tucked in, because these are 150-pound, completely wild, meat-eating animals that are absolutely fearless. They've never seen humans before. And if they're curious about something, if I'm like, what's that? I'll pick it up with my hand and look at it. Oluas don't have hands. They pick it up with their mouth. So, yeah, what we might perceive as aggression many times I think is just curiosity. But they are more aggressive than the sharks. Generally, when you're in the water and the ulua come in and they're circling you, the sharks are circling outside of the ulua. If the ulua go away, then the sharks come in. So arguably, one could say ulua really rule the reef. They are the apex predators up there.
Sure. Thanks. Another question. Fishing and conservation. Sometimes I think it's painted, especially when we're talking about the monument or these other designations, as an us and them. I want to just, you've, I think, told me on the boat that you consider yourself probably a fisherman first and a scientist second. So in the interest of just trying to like bridge this gap rather than divide, how do you wear both hats?
I don't always wear them both at the same time, let's put it that way. But yeah, I've been in therapy for years. I'm a fisherman. I work in conservation biology. The way I reconcile it in my mind is that the best fishermen are, in fact, good conservationists. They don't fish themselves out of house and home. They rotate their spots. They follow the laws. Conversely, I'm a fisherman. I'm a scientist. I don't see conservation measures as being anti-fishing, which I think a lot of fishermen do. I think there's this assumption that fishing and conservation are polar opposites and never the twain shall meet. And I just don't see the world that way. I see good conservation as a fishery enhancement tool, and that we need to protect some areas so that I can keep protecting, fishing others. And I think globally, something like 3% of our oceans are protected, which means me and my little Boston whaler, we can fish 97% of the world's oceans. If that's an anti-fishing thing, I don't see it. I really think some conservation is necessary to ensure sustainable fishing in the long term, so my kids can keep fishing and their kids. So I think conservation is a part of fishing. They are just not separate worlds apart.
Great, thanks. I appreciate that. Another question. Randy, can you tell me about the greenfoot opihi in Papahānaumokuākea?
I am a little self-conscious about taking that one on because Dr. Brian Bowen from HIMB is in the house. And the story there has been told by genetics. And the really interesting story here is that in the terrestrial environment, we have birds, we have tree snails, we have fruit flies, where one or a small number of ancestors have diversified and radiated into dozens of endemic species. And generally, the marine environment doesn't have that. You have one ancestral species that somehow got to Hawaii. It's isolated here. It differentiates into a new species, but you have one ancestral species and one Hawaii endemic. Opihi, we have one ancestral species, but we have 3, potentially 4, or maybe even more species of opihi. So that already is a really interesting evolutionary story there. And if anyone wants to pursue this, I would encourage you to find Brian. I don't see him where I'd point him out right now. But yeah, the opihi that we do up there, we've turned that into a community engagement tool. So we've gone to communities that like to manage their own opihi fisheries. Generally, these are kind of remote areas, so they don't have a lot of people coming in, and they can do their own community enforcement through peer pressure rather than regulation. So Hana, Kalapana, Kaupulehu on the Big Island. We've taken people from these communities to come with us to do opihi surveys in Nihoa, Mokumanamana on the rocky lava rocks. it gives them a charge when they go and see what a virgin stock of opihi looks like. I mean, you literally you cannot walk without stepping on 8 or 10 opihi at a time. That's what a virgin stock looks like, and they're just like, oh my God, what have we done back home? We can do better. And so we kind of use this as an inspirational moment, an educational place where we bring people from here to see what an unslid baseline for a Hawaiian island looks like. And when they go home, they are fired up about, oh my God, what have we done? And oh my God, what can we do to restore some of this? And these are fishers. These are people that pick opihi and eat them. So conservation and fishing can definitely coexist in the same person, in the same boat, in the same project. And this is one thing that really gives me hope that these communities, we can use this place as an educational tool to show what our main Hawaiian Islands here might look like if we did a little better job with marine management.
Sure. Thanks. Appreciate that. I know my son would be super stoked if there were more opihi around here. He declared recently that that's the most delicious thing to come out of the ocean. Let's go to another one. Please advise how NOAA, law enforcement, U.S. Coast Guard, DLNR, DoCare have updated patrol enforcement cases. I'm not sure if that's in your lane or not, but feel free to share.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that. I'm a biologist more than an enforcement guy. Eric, would you want to say a couple of words about that? Yeah, sorry. Eric is our superintendent, but in his previous life, he was with the U.S. Coast Guard, so he's probably the best guy on the island.
Thank you. And you can tell by my uniform here that I was not planning to be identified, and I just wanted to come in and enjoy this as a supporter of Civil Beat. So thank you, Civil Beat, for doing this. And I think so. That question is correct. The major enforcement agencies that patrol this area and safeguard it are NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement, Fish and Wildlife Office of Law Enforcement, U.S. Coast Guard, and then the state of Hawaii also has authority as well. So this place is extremely remote, as Randy had discussed. And so that already is a very large deterrent. And so most of the enforcement efforts are remote monitoring. And so there's various ways in which that's done through vessel monitoring systems. So any vessel that goes up there on a permit has to have a vessel monitoring system on board so we can monitor where that vessel is operating during the whole course of their permit activities up there. And then many vessels, just by their size and nature, have to have AIS systems on board too. So those are automated information systems that locate the vessel. And so there are various ways in which our enforcement partners monitor that area, and they're always posed to respond to any threats. So it's not an easy place to get to. I used to do a lot of C-130 aircraft patrols when I was with the Coast Guard, and that's about a 10-hour day just flying up to the top and back. It's about 5 hours each way in a C-130. It's cold, it's slow, it's loud. And you generally don't see a whole lot up there. I think, on a lucky day, we might see a NOAA research vessel up there, but you don't see a lot of activity up there. So really the benefit of this place, the same reasons why you see it biologically protected is the same reason why you see it also protected from a lot of human use and a lot of human traffic. And so vessels are required to notify us when they pass through. And so we can monitor whether or not vessels that are passing through have notified us, and they have to notify us when they depart as well. And that's both internationally and domestically. So there's a lot of safeguards in place to monitor it. And our partners in law enforcement are always ready to respond if something comes up and we have any indication of wrongdoing up there.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric.
That provided an inadvertent transition to the next question. You mentioned only seeing like one vessel up there. I think we only saw one vessel up there the entire time. I think it was part of the Papahānaumokuākea Marine Debris Project. The question is, how can we get involved with the cleanups out there? And who do we call when we find these large, heavy items on the beach? And again, let's see. Yeah.
Kevin O'Brien is in the room. Kevin is the president of the Papahānaumokuākea Marine Debris Program, and I can't see anyone with these lights. But Kevin, you want to take that one and just comment on how to help with marine debris?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. And that project's one of our partners this evening, along with Limu Huli, the Marine Option Program folks. And go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. There's our little team back there if you want to say hi later. The marine debris in the monument is the accumulation rate is much higher, it would seem, than down here in the main Hawaiian Islands, and yet there's no one really up there to deal with the problem, which is why we formed our organization on the heels of a long multi-decade NOAA effort to continue the cleanups up there. In terms of getting involved, it's really hard for the everyday citizen to help out or participate in the cleanups. Each year, we take 16 folks that are highly trained boat operators and freedivers up on a ship for a month at a time. Last year, we did, what, James? 77 days in the monument conducting these cleanups. While we wish we could take everyone here up there to get their hands dirty and help with the cleanups, it's just not possible. But we do our best with what we have. Some federal funding as well as some private funding making this happen. But as far as what you can do to help, I think the first step is really just sharing what you know about this place. Often we don't, in our outreach efforts, we don't really encounter too many people who know too much about Papahānaumokuākea. And the first step really is like building a relationship with the place and showing people how amazing it is and that there's so much to love and want to protect and help steward, and then obviously hitting them with the doom and gloom with this terrible problem of a marine debris accumulation in the monument. To give you guys a sense for the the scale of the problem there, in 2024, our organization cleaned up 165 tons of plastic and nets. And in the last 4 years, it's now gone over 1 million pounds that we've cleaned up from the monument. So we're talking like a whole other order of magnitude of accumulation beyond what you normally see here. Definitely gone over my time. Thank you.
Oh, it's all good. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I just got to say, Kevin and his team do just an unbelievably fantastic job of the marine debris. They kind of cut their teeth working for NOAA and learned the marine debris trade there and realized there's probably a more efficient and better way to do this. And so he formed his own nonprofit, and they bring in millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars a year to do the marine debris removals. And this year, while Nathan and I were at sea, we saw their lights at Pearl and Hermes Atoll, and that was in September. And for us nerdy scientist types, there's a international hierarchy of science journals, but at the very top, the most prestigious journal is a journal called simply Science. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. While we were at sea in September, the weekly issue of Science had the cover photo was the Papahānaumokuākea Marine Debris Project. They published a paper and got the cover. The cover of Science is just amazing, and my mind is blown still. And even more important than getting a picture on the cover is that the results that they presented show that over a couple of decades of marine debris removal, the removals really have enhanced monk seal health and survivorship. So really, it is making a difference. And these guys do such a terrific job. Kevin, James, you guys, my hat's off to you.
I just topped 1 million pounds, I think, right? And coincidentally, someone on the cover in that photo, I think, was on our ship. And
one of our marine technicians at NOAA has previously worked with Kevin. And so there she was, the cover girl. She works for us, and she's on the cover of Science.
Oh, that's great. One question I had, well, it's actually from my son, I have to confess. I was trying to brainstorm some questions last night while hoping and praying he would fall asleep. And he said, ask him why algae? Like, how did you go from fish biologist to algae? And I realized I didn't have the answer to that of all the questions I had asked you. So how did you get into algae of all things?
I kind of stumbled backwards into limu, besides eating it since I've been a kid. I'm a fish biologist. I really consider myself to be a fish ecologist. But on some of these really deep dives that we do, we're going to someplace that almost no one goes to, and then we're going deeper than most people go. And there were all these beautiful algae. So I didn't know what they were. I'm not a phycologist, but I recognize most of the common species of algae. I can name a few of them. But at 300 feet, I didn't recognize any of this. And so I just started picking them up and this is my role in this thing, is I, very simple-minded, colorful objects, shiny objects. I put them in my bag, and then I give them to real algal phycologists who describe them. So we're probably pushing 40 new species of algae because algae are a little more challenging to learn than fish. Far fewer people study algae than fish. This is a place no one ever goes to. It really hasn't been sampled for new species of algae. So in spite of the fact that I'm a fish guy, I actually have far more new species of algae that I've discovered than fish, which is kind of embarrassing. It's getting bad. One of my friends who's a fish biologist, Dr. Richard Pyle at the Bishop Museum, he's a notorious deep diver. And we came up with this bag of algae, and I'm just smiling and laughing. And I think he meant it as a derogatory term, but he goes, "Randy, you botanist." So I think it's supposed to be a deep insult to a fish biologist, but I didn't. I took it as a compliment. Anyway, that's why algae is. It's just because we're seeing things that we don't recognize or definitely don't have names. So we bring them back to more appropriate scientists to work them up.
Thanks. I want to make sure, too, I leave enough time for folks to interact with the booths and just mingle after this. So we'll take a couple more and then do that. There's also plenty of musubi left, so please help yourself. Have seconds, have thirds, try all four. Go crazy. But another question that's coming in is, again, marine debris. What happens to the marine debris when it's brought back? Is there a way to help, like, once it comes back? And then, like, where is it coming from to begin with?
Kevin, you want to take this one again? I'm sorry. I'll buy you a beer afterwards.
That's actually a question that's becoming more and more interesting, the answer to it. Normally, like, for the past 20 years or so since I've been doing this, we would send it to Covanta, which is the power plant down in Campbell, Kapolei, and it would be incinerated to generate electricity, which is still our primary outlet for this stuff. We're on an island. We have limited options for what we do with it. It's primarily HDPE plastic and polypropylene plastic, even the fishing nets. So it's actually a really easy plastic to work with. So recently, we have a partnership with the Hawaii Pacific University and University of Hawaii for their Center for Marine Debris Research, and they're working on developing a plastic recycling research facility to pilot projects to put this stuff to good use locally. So they're working on how to make plastic lumber out of this stuff. They've paved a test strip of roadway on the island here using the net plastics as the binder in the asphalt. And they're doing some tests on that to make sure it's safe. And they're also working on producing some building products, like some little rebar forms that they can use made out of this plastic. So we gave them about, what, James, 70,000 pounds this year to be able to work on those pilot projects. So pretty interesting. And then, of course, if you're an artist, we'll give you anything you want, buoys, nets, We gave some to the zoo one time for the elephants to play with, Any creative things you can think of, it's all yours.
Thanks.
Oh, can I just mention one thing? We're going to be putting out our recruitment for this skier's field team at the end of the month. So if you know anyone that's interested, anyone with a really strong back and a good breath hold, we're going to be recruiting 6 to 8 positions this year to come join us on our summer field team.
Fantastic. One other question I had too is, aside from maybe chondria and a couple other words, one word I heard you say a lot during our ride was quest. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the quest program and what that means and what it is and why it's so dear.
Sure. I'd love to. Quest is a University of Hawaii at Kilo 4-credit marine science course, quantitative underwater ecological survey techniques. Basically, they take undergraduate student divers, teach them the tools of the trade, how to do basic coral surveys, fish counts, and it really is a rigorous class. It's the only one like it in the country that I'm aware of, and it's won some national awards. But it really is teaches you the basics of coral reef survey. So a lot of people come to me and go, "Oh, Randy, how could I get an internship or get to work on a cruise?" The first thing I say is, "Have you done Quest?" That's like the union card that shows that you have a basic level of training in these underwater survey techniques. I cut my teeth in Quest back in the back in the 1900s. So I was a Quest student, and I can honestly say that virtually every good thing that has happened to me career-wise, I could somehow track back to that experience at Quest. That taught me the basic underwater transect methods, which led as a college sophomore to my first trip to Papahānaumokuākea on a DLNR cruise. And yeah, so we still involved with Quest. We give small scholarships to students. It's a summer lab course, so there's like a $1,400 bench fee. It's not cheap. For an undergrad, you have to have a full set of scuba gear and blah, blah, blah. So we try to support some of these students. And then we headhunt. We go to Quest and we watch them, and we basically hire the 2 or 3 best students as interns, and they work alongside my scientists collecting data. It's not the kind of internship where you politely thank them at the end and you take their data and put it in the circular file. I mean, they are publishing with my scientists from these data. And so it's a great, it gives them so much real world experience working alongside NOAA scientists. And many Quest graduates now work for NOAA. And so it creates this pool of talent that we can draw on, as we need to hire scientists and scientific divers. So it really is one of the most unique educational offerings I think the University of Hawaii has. And it's a really terrific program, or I wouldn't be sitting here.
Thanks, Randy. I think it's probably a pretty good time to. Do you have any parting comments or things that we didn't cover that you wanted to? Okay. To thank you all again for coming here. Again, I wanted to make sure we allow time for folks to just hang out in this space, mingle, eat more musubi, like I mentioned. I also wanted to say thanks for all the member supporters that make this kind of journalism possible. Let me go somewhere for 3 or 4 weeks and come back and then actually have the time to do these stories. And special thanks to Amy for freeing my schedule up, and the other editors who picked up my slack. And a special thanks to the funders who really lead our way for providing the funding for climate change reporting. That's the Healy Foundation, Marisla Fund of the Hawaii Community Foundation, and the Frost Family Foundation. So again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Randy, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nathan. Terrific.